Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, I guess. I'm on New York time. Yeah, I'm really glad we're having this discussion. And Bonnie, thank you so much for including me in this. I wanted to share some thoughts about California. Bonnie asked me to talk a little bit about the national picture and then also to share some reactions or observations about California, specifically as it relates to the Senate race. So I want to do that. But I also just want to let you know, I do this, I'm not a university-based researcher. I'm actually an organizer and an activist. And so I look at these issues, if you will, from an organizing point of view, and also specifically relative to independence, since the organization that I head up, which is called Independent Voting, represents independent voters, and we're concerned about the issue of leveling the playing field structurally, but also culturally, for independent voters. And so what's taken place in California in terms of the adoption of Top 2 is huge. We're involved in numerous situations around the country where we're trying to emulate what you have done here, and hopefully we'll get some success in that regard. Here's some numbers to put in front of you, just to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the things that I'm looking at. Just nationally, in the presidential election, independents were 31% of the total electorate. That's the highest share of the national electorate that independents have been since the advent of polling. So that's a big number. Nationally, independents broke for Donald Trump. 48% for Trump, 42% for Clinton. Another 10% went for independent candidates or didn't respond to the question. It's interesting, there's been a lot of debate about this factor since independents broke so substantially for Barack Obama in 2008, both within the primaries and also in the general election. So a lot of people are saying, well, you know, does this mean there's been a big ideological shift on the part of independent voters? My answer to that is actually no. I think that independent voters are moving around the political spectrum looking for platforms to give expression to a new kind of politic and a new kind of political paradigm. And I happen to believe that we're in transition right now between a horizontal, ideologically driven paradigm, and it was interesting to look at your attempts to analyze the Senate race through an ideological prism. But I think we're in a transition away from that to something else. Some of you may be familiar with a poll that Pat Cadell did a couple of weeks before the election, in which he asked respondents, do they agree with the following statement? The greatest divide in America is not between Democrats and Republicans, but between the American people and the elites. And 67% of respondents said they agreed with that statement, that it's not a Democrat-Republican divide, that there's something else that's going on. In California, I took a look at the exit polling for independents. Independents were 30% of the electorate for president and 31% of the electorate in the U.S. Senate race. In the presidential race, independents broke 50% for Clinton, 37% for Trump, 7% for Johnson, 5% for Stein. And in the Senate race, independents broke very substantially for Harris, 62 to 38%. Here's the thing, though, that I found most interesting, and this is what I want to share with you, and maybe we'll have some discussion about this within the panel. I looked, of course, at the drop-off rate between the numbers of people who voted for president and then the numbers of people who voted for the U.S. Senate. I was just kind of browsing around through statistics and trying to see what struck me. So I was looking at that, and I gathered that the fall-off rate, and this is fairly typical, in these kinds of elections, the fall-off was about 1.75 million fewer voters voted in the Senate race than voted in the presidential race. And then I gather that of that fall-off, about 900,000, or about half of the fall-off, was Republicans, which, I assume can be attributed to the fact that some Republicans didn't want to vote in an election where the choices were too Democrats. There's probably other reasons as well, but that seems like a logical conclusion to make there. And then I think about 500,000 independents voted top of the ballot and didn't move down, and about 400,000 Democrats. So you get a fall off from the top to the Senate race, but then I looked at a question that the exit pollers asked, which was very, very interesting, which was that they asked people who voted in the Senate race who they had voted for president. And 26% of respondents said that they voted for Trump. Okay. So I was looking at that, and I thought, oh my goodness, there's something incredibly interesting here. Namely that over 3 million Californians who voted for Trump, who voted for Donald Trump for president, voted for either Harris or Sanchez for U.S. Senate. Now think about this for a second. It completely flies in the face of the political categorizations that have been leveled at different sets of voters. The Trump voter is this kind of voter. The Clinton voter is this kind of voter. They believe in this kind of thing. They like these kinds of people. They don't like those kinds of people. And yet, here in the California situation, there was this incredible thing that you could call it an anomaly, namely the Trump voters who voted for one of two women of color who are politically progressive, who hold to positions that are completely out of step with what most people reasonably believe are President-elect Trump's positions on things, and yet that happened. So I share this with you because I think this is really very, very important, because I think it's part of, this is not a statistical point, it's really more of a cultural point or a social transformation point, because I think that part of what the top two system allows you to do as a voter and as a part of a community of voters is to step outside of the boundaries of what you're typically expected to do and make some choices and decisions based on a completely different set of criteria than what the expected criteria might be. They're not ideological. They're something else. What are they? Well, that's a big open question, and in some respects, I think that's a question that the country as a whole is facing now. What are the political benchmarks that we use? How do we build coalitions? Who can come together? Can people come together that the experts say that they couldn't possibly come together? I think part of what you see in this little microcosm of the California results is a picture of opportunities to bring people together in some new ways. So from my vantage point, I'm an advocate for top two at level one because of what it does to open the door for independent voters. But I think what I'm talking about here is something even more than that. Independent voting is not just something that declined to state voters do. Independent voting is something I think that many, many Americans want to be able to do. And I think the top two system creates that opportunity and opens the door to that. So, thank you.